Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Here's an outline of the presentation materials that we're going to be covering today. Over the course of this webinar, we'll be providing an overview of the Ocean Protection Council, Senate Bill 1, and then an explanation of this SB1 grant and technical assistance program. So this will include OPC's SB1 funding overview, the solicitation schedule, applicant eligibility, and funding priorities for this solicitation. And then following that, I will lay out the process for how to apply for this, as well as next steps. And then we'll, of course, move into accepting some questions during Q&A. Okay, so what is the Ocean Protection Council? The OPC is a cabinet-level state agency that is charged with protecting, conserving, and maintaining California's ocean and marine resources for the benefit of current and future generations. The role of OPC is to recommend policy, lead and promote coordination, seek and leverage funding, inform government decision-making with sound science, and operate with transparency and accountability. So OPC really is at that intersection of science, policy, and management. We at OPC do recognize that all Californians have the right to equitable access to the resources available through OPC. However, environmental and justice and tribal communities often face challenges when competing with well-resourced entities for funding. So therefore, we do acknowledge at OPC the need for technical assistance to support direct application services and capacity building support for technical assistance recipients. One of our most important documents here at OPC, and really what covers all of our current priorities, is our strategic plan. We're currently halfway through the years that this strategic plan is covering. We adopted this plan in 2020, and we'll continue to work through these goals and specific targets through 2025. So if you have not yet checked out this document, I highly encourage you to do so. This is that cover page on the slide right here. What we're covering in the solicitation, in the webinar today, and what's really in the solicitation, it's ultimately meant to implement the strategic plan targets and objectives, and namely for this one, objective 1.1 and 2.2. Okay, so that's OPC. That's our current strategies. But what exactly is Senate Bill 1? What is this new program? So for some background, in 2021, Governor Newsom signed the Senate Bill 1 into law, and SB1 directs the state to provide funding to local and regional governments to develop sea level rise adaptation plans and implementation projects. Currently, we recognize that there are many gaps in adaptation planning along the coast as part of an OPC-funded project that created an inventory and analysis of California's progress on coastal adaptation planning. It was determined that only 9 out of 76 coastal jurisdictions have updated local coastal programs, or LCPs, that include sea level rise. And then 22 jurisdictions have a standalone, not an LCP, but a standalone sea level rise adaptation plan, but the plans aren't consistent in their standards or their criteria across those jurisdictions. So in response to this and recognizing this need and these gaps, in 2022, OPC received $37.5 million to support the implementation of SB1. The SB1 Sea Level Rise Adaptation Planning Grant Program, or SB1 Grant Program for short, it's still in the process of being developed here. We are working very hard over the summer to develop this program, but we know that the overall goal of the program is going to be provide funding for coastal communities to develop sea level rise adaptation plans to build resilience to sea level rise along the entire coast of California and San Francisco Bay. So the SB1 grant program, we're anticipating and hoping to launch that in fall 2023. We're envisioning it to be rolling application with selected projects brought to quarterly OPC meetings. And we'd like to complement that with a sea level rise adaptation planning technical assistance program. So the SB1 TA program, which is what we're talking about here. And that is really just hoping to provide direct application services to qualified SB1 grant program applicants to ensure equitable access to sea level rise planning funds and coastal resilience resources. So getting into the specifics of what we're looking for with this SB1 TA program solicitation. Here is just an overview of our funding. The total amount of anticipated funding for this project is $1 million. We are only anticipating selecting one grantee, so one TA provider for this. It might be a team of people, but one TA provider, one main grantee. The maximum project length is 2 years, with the project being completed by December 2025. And I will say it multiple times throughout this informational webinar, but the proposals are due to us at that email, that opc-ta@resources.ca.gov email by 5 p.m. on July 13th. Here is a timeline of the solicitation. So full proposals, as I've said, due July 13th, 2023. A review and the selection of a TA provider will be occurring in the late summer and the early fall. And then I included the approximate release of the actual SB1 the SB1 grant program RFP itself, as we would love to do a paired launch of the SB1 grant program and the SB1 TA program at the same time, so that those that qualify for TA may be able to receive that technical assistance as soon as possible. And all of this is available in the solicitation as well. So I will go into more of the details of who's eligible for this opportunity, as well as what we're really looking for, but I just wanted you to have kind of top of mind the process of what this actually looks like if you want to apply. So to apply, there's a template for a full proposal or an application that's available on our SB1 funding webpage. So you'll find all of the instructions on how to actually fill out that template within the application template form itself. And then each of the sections within the full proposal have page limits that I, again, will point out down the line, but I just kind of want you to have this top of mind as we kind of go into a little bit more detail of what we're looking for and who is eligible for this opportunity. Okay, so first let's start with applicant eligibility. So applicants that are eligible for this particular grant from OPC consist of local, state, and federal agencies, public or private universities, nonprofit organizations, including community-based organizations that qualify under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Service, and California Native American tribes. I would like to note that private entities are not eligible to be the lead applicant on this particular opportunity or the main grantee on this project, but private entities are eligible to be a part of the applicant team as a subcontractor. So just keeping that in mind as you're maybe thinking to form a team for the next slide, which is tackling all of the minimum qualifications that we're looking for. So in addition to those actual eligible types of entities that can receive the funding, we also have these minimum qualifications listed here that we're really looking for the applicant team to have as a whole. So these include having the capacity and expertise needed to administer the program, experience working in and with environmental justice communities and California Native American tribes, expertise in California coastal climate and environmental topics, especially sea level rise planning, experience developing applications for competitive grants, implementing those grants through strong project management and coordinating with state or federal grantors. And additionally, the team should demonstrate strong facilitation skills and have experience working across communities throughout California. We'd like to note here that this solicitation encourages a team-based approach to technical assistance. We see that various entities could collaborate to contribute specific subject matter expertise or specific types of geographical or community experience. And so we're kind of expecting it to not necessarily just be one main entity that's doing and able to satisfy all of these qualifications, but really it's going to be building a team that applies together. Okay, so that's all of the eligibility criteria. So let's actually jump into what this TA program priorities are and what we're actually looking to fund. So ultimately, the overall goal of this solicitation is to find a TA provider who will support local, regional, and tribal governments that represent environmental justice communities and preparing and submitting competitive applications to the SB1 grant program. This is the first TA program that we are offering and establishing at OPC. And so we're hoping that this SB1 TA program also, it's intended to really lay the groundwork for future OPC TA efforts. And so as such, the TA provider, we're hoping, will work alongside OPC staff to build this TA program that not only fits the SB1 grant program's goals and funding source requirements, but will also provide a framework that can be tailored to those future TA efforts that tackle other OPC priorities. And then lastly, just keeping in mind the overarching goal of SB1 and the SB1 grant program, which is of course to prepare the entire coast of California and San Francisco Bay for sea level rise. We also see the TA provider performing outreach and education to solicit interest in the TA program and the SB1 grant program itself. So with all of these overarching goals in mind, we have listed 4 main project tasks that we're looking for the TA provider to perform, and I've listed those here. 1 is administration coordination and reporting. 2 is establishing the SB1 TA program. 3 is SB1 TA outreach and education, and 4 is SB1 grant program direct application assistant. I will dig into each of these in a little bit more detail in the following slides, but I just want to stress before I do that for each of these tasks, please be sure to read the actual descriptions of each of these tasks in the solicitation in detail, as really filling in the pieces and these details of these tasks is really the bulk of the application itself. So we're going to go into those details, but I really strongly encourage you to take a really strong look and a deep read within the solicitation itself under each of these tasks. Okay, so for the first task, as with any grant with OPC, our first task is going to be administration, coordination, and reporting. This will consist of a kickoff meeting with OPC staff where we'll work to finalize a work plan that'll include a timeline that identifies milestones and a schedule for all deliverables. And then beyond that initial kickoff meeting, it's also expected that the TA provider will provide regular status updates and attend meetings with the OPC project manager on this grant. On a quarterly basis throughout the project, it's also expected that the TA provider will deliver quarterly reports to OPC, and those will really outline progress and meeting work plan deliverables, provide feedback on the program and how it's going, provide application assessment updates for each of the TA recipients that received technical assistance during the quarter. And then at the very end of the grant, following the completion of all other activities, we are hoping the TA provider will also provide a final report that will evaluate the success of the actual technical assistance provided, as well as the successes and challenges faced during the grant, and then best practices and recommendations for future rounds of the SB1 TA program and really just future OPC TA efforts. The main deliverables for this task will be those quarterly reports and that final report that I just mentioned. Okay, task 2 is the actual design and finalization of the SB1 TA program itself. So this will be where specifics like defining the actual criteria used to be able to identify TA recipients, how many hours each TA recipient should receive, a timeline for providing technical assistance to each recipient, and then also refining the list of the actual assistance that can be provided to each TA recipient. So that is where all of this will be finalized. We do anticipate that the SB1 grant program, as I mentioned earlier, will be a rolling application. And so we've thought that there is a chance that there may be times of really high demand or lower demand from TA recipients. So like at one given time, if a lot of people are interested in receiving TA, we need to we understand that there's only so much capacity that the TA provider will have. And so that's where that contingency method comes in for prioritizing TA recipients. So if there ever is an interest that exceeds the TA provider capacity, how would you kind of work through the list to be able to ensure that everyone can receive it, just maybe not right at the same time? For this task, the main deliverables are the actual work plan of the SB1 TA program. That'll be part of the grant agreement, but then also a technical assistance framework that will be a little bit more refined as we work through this list. A TA recipient work plan template that will be used with each TA recipient to outline their particular path towards submission of a grant application. And then I just want to stress, I mentioned at the beginning, but I want to stress particularly on this slide, I'm going to get to the application instructions and details in a few slides, but talking about task 2 specifically, this list here, some of these details, such as the determination of criteria for identifying TA recipients. This is what we're really looking for from each applicant within their actual application. This is what we're looking you to kind of fill in these details and pitch to us within the application itself. So again, I'm going to bring it up in a few slides, but just want to connect those dots that task 2 is really when it's called out in the application template, which hopefully some of you have already seen so far in those instructions, this list and what's in the solicitation under task 2 is really what we're referencing. Okay, so moving on, task 3 is the outreach and education to potential applicants of the SB1 grant program. So it's under this task that we're envisioning that the TA provider provides informational webinars, attends workshops and events for educating about the SB1 TA program would be appropriate, and then also scoping out potential applicants who may qualify for TA. We see task 3 continuing throughout the duration of the grant, but we kind of see it shifting from a heavy focus in the TA provider's work plan in the first few months or quarters of the grant to later adjusting and refining to reflect where more targeted outreach may be needed as the program continues. And then for task 3, the main deliverables are an outreach and education plan, any materials that are used in outreach events like webinar slides or recordings, and then summaries of those outreach events like the number of attendees. Okay, and then lastly, we have the big one. We have task 4, which is where the TA provider is actually providing the direct application assistance to applicants of the SB1 grant program that qualify for TA support. So it's here that the TA provider will initiate contact with each TA recipient and they'll hold an introductory meeting. This will be where the TA provider will provide an assessment to those TA recipients or applicants on meeting thresholds, requirements, and submitting an actual competitive SB1 grant application. Based on the applicant's needs, the TA provider will draft a work plan for the proposed application that identifies what specific technical assistance will be provided, as well as a proposed schedule. And then a list of those potential technical assistance services are provided in the solicitation on page 10. But this list is what we're also, again, looking for the applicant to refine to reflect their skill set, what past experience has shown is typically most needed for technical assistance and application support. So that's really, again, what we're looking for you to refine within your application itself. But a list that gives you kind of an example of that can all be found on page 10 of the solicitation. And then, of course, for each TA recipient, it will also be expected that the TA provider will maintain regular contact and have regular meetings to ensure that those benchmarks and timeline are being followed so that everything is on track for them to eventually submit an application to the SB1 grant program. The task 4 deliverables will include the work plan that's established with each TA recipient, minutes and summaries of meetings with the TA recipients, templates and materials that are utilized in application coordination activities, and then documentation of when an application is actually submitted and once you have finished working with the TA recipient and have their application sent in. And then check-ins with OPC staff just to provide us updates on the applicant's major milestones and challenges. Okay, so I know that was a lot of detail packed into those task slides, but again, I just want to emphasize how important those details are. It's really the meat of what we're looking for this program and what we're hoping to establish. And so I did provide a lot of them in these slides, but please do make sure that you read the solicitation in detail. It is under section 2C, tasks and deliverables, to really gain a full understanding of all that's expected from each of these tasks. Okay, so with all of that, if you feel that your entity, along with any partners, fit the qualifications, you're interested, and you feel that you could successfully complete these tasks, we strongly encourage you to apply by submitting a full proposal. So in order to apply, again, please review the SB1 TA program solicitation itself, and then you'll go ahead and download the proposal template and then fully complete per the instructions that are located within the actual proposal template document. Then you will send the completed proposal package to that email on the screen, opc-ta@resources.ca.gov, with the subject, the main applicant's name, SB1 TA program proposal, and all of that is due by 5 p.m. on July 13th. To access all of the documents and application materials that I've mentioned above and before, just visit our SB1 funding webpage, which is at opc.ca.gov/SB1funding. Okay, to walk through the application itself in a little bit more detail, here's an overview of the proposal template, everything that you can find in that Word doc that's available on our SB1 funding webpage. The first one is a cover page. This is where you're going to fill in that summary information for your project. So the very first table will be the lead applicant or the lead entity on the application, filling in contact information, address, etc. And then you should also include contact information and a brief description of the role of every subcontractor that will be part of the application team. So there is a list provided on the first page of like the first prompts in bold, like name, address, things like that for the first subcontractor. And then you can just copy and paste that and fill it out for each subsequent one for as many subcontractors that you have. So I know it says this is page 1, but if you have more than just one subcontractor and it goes on to multiple pages, that's okay. you're allowed to have more than one page for the cover page. We really want all of that information for every subcontractor that's a part of the team. Page 2 of the template is the application completeness checklist. This is what you should revisit and fill out as you're preparing to actually submit your final proposal to us. All of the sections within this whole application template are required, as well as the supplemental documents, including the project team resumes and the project letters. The exception of this is the nonprofit questionnaire that is only required for nonprofit organizations. And then starting on page 3 is the actual application space, which starts with the response to scope of work and then works all the way through to section 6, the budget, and then attaching the supplemental documents. So for these sections, you should draft your responses to the prompts below each of the headings, and then you can delete the instruction text, the thing that's actually giving you instructions. You can delete that so that you can maximize your page limits. For section 3, you have 2 pages max, and there are 3 different subsections: summary, project management team and capacity, and methodology / approach to work. There's 3 different sections, and each of those have instructions. So feel free to delete that once you've drafted everything so that you can maximize those 2 pages. And then for section 4, 3 pages, section 5, 2 pages, and the budget is 1. We do ask that you keep the same font that is already in the template. So that's Calibri size 12 font. So really the way that we want you to maximize is deleting the instructions, but please keep it. Don't try to make it be like size 9 font where it's really hard to read, just so that you keep that page limit. Section 4 right here, the project work plan, the 3 pages that you have here. This is what I keep pointing out, where I kept pointing out the task details, especially task 2. This is where it's really important. So this is where we're looking for you to really pitch your idea of what the SB1 TA program work plan will be, with all of those details, like what criteria will determine who qualifies for TA, things like that are going to be found. Let's see. Yep, so this is where reading those details on the scope of work and tasks and deliverables within that RFP is key, so that you're making sure that you're really touching all of it in your application. For all of this, we ask that you combine it into one single PDF. So this application template, as well as the resumes or CVs, as well as any project letters, as well as the nonprofit organization questionnaire, all of that gets combined into one document and attached as an attachment to the email that you're submitting for your full proposal. Okay, so with that, I know that was a lot of information. I understand that questions are going to arise throughout the process over the next couple of months, and we want to give you plenty of time to ask those in just a minute or 2. We also, I just want to point out that we have another opportunity for you guys to ask questions maybe a little bit further down the line as you're getting to different parts of the application and maybe something arises, and that will be through a virtual office hours on June 20th at 1:30 p.m. You can find the registration link for that within the RFP or the solicitation, as well as our SB1 funding webpage. And that will not be, there won't be any slides, there won't be a formal presentation for that. That will really just be some OPC staff available within that hour for you to just pop in and ask any questions that you have. Today's webinar recording, as I mentioned earlier, and the slides will be made available on our SB1 funding webpage, hopefully before the end of the week. You can also email us through the OPCTA email that's shown on the screen. And then also we have an FAQ that is posted on our SB1 webpage that I will update continuously before July 13th with any questions from either today's webinar, the office hours, or that we get through the email. Okay, and with that, I would like to turn it over to Ella just to open it up for questions. Please feel free again to just use the raise hand function within Zoom, or you can just come off camera and raise your hand, or you can also pop some questions into the chat and we'll try to answer them there. If we can't get to your question during this time, again, please email us, as well as if anything comes up after this fact, we are happy to do that over email as well. And then also, again, those very specific questions, it's a little bit more helpful, I think, in doing it over email so that we can really ensure that we're giving you the right answer and having the time to actually think that through. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Ella. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Great, thanks, Megan. Please, folks, go ahead, fire away with some questions. Since we do have a smaller group, feel free to just take yourself off mute. There's not too many of us here. And we'll probably just hang around and see if there are any questions if no one's keen to ask right away. So no pressure, we'll be here.
Hi, thank you for putting on this webinar. I have two questions. One of them is, based on what you've heard developing this RFP, where do you anticipate the most need for technical assistance, whether it's a geographical area or a certain group of organizations? Where do you anticipate there being the most need? And my other question is, do you think there will be an extension to the deadline, or is that pretty set in stone? And I'm just thinking about the upcoming holiday. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Great questions. Thanks, Tina. To address the first one, in our minds, there are a couple areas where we expect, most of this energy to go. I think the first overall for SB1 in general is that we're looking for communities that are at risk to sea level rise. So communities that are vulnerable, I think, is kind of like the broad criteria. And then we would cross that with lower income communities, tribal communities, and then areas that have not yet embarked on a planning journey for sea level rise. So, I don't necessarily know those communities off the top of my head, but I know that there's very few, the density of sea level rise adaptation planning is lower in the North Coast. I know that, there are some areas in Orange County that still have kind of hangups in their planning process. The Bay Area, because they haven't traditionally had, the LCP process. Those are kind of some of my general ideas, but, we're not really sure. I think that's part of this journey, is to see what comes up and how we can ensure that, it is our goal to cover the coast of California. So we definitely want to find those gaps and address them. Another resource I have now that we're talking about it, we do have a planning inventory, and I will find the link for it. And it actually shows coverage of sea level rise adaptation plans across the coast. And that, if you comb through that, it would definitely show some gaps. And then, like I was saying, cross-reference with low-income communities and tribal groups. I will find that. And then your other question about the deadline, that's a great question. We don't anticipate extending it. We haven't had a ton of feedback yet, honestly. So, we haven't felt a sense of urgency or time pressure that would convince us to extend it at this time. But we will certainly let people know if we do.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thanks for putting on this webinar. It's awesome that this is being offered across the state. I just had a question about whether OPC has already done the research and identified communities that are vulnerable to sea level rise, and are we targeting specific communities to apply or to partner already? How is that going?
Sure. We don't necessarily have like a list of communities that are vulnerable. I think it would just take a fairly simple analysis, via some sea level rise viewer. But, I know there are kind of like pockets like Marin Marin City, San Rafael. And then there are other areas like Humboldt Bay. They're kind of like the known areas with really high sea level rise vulnerability. Don't necessarily have a list off the top of my head, but just taking a look at a viewer, like I said, might be one way to do it. And then, yeah, thank you, Megan, for dropping that in. There's definitely some gaps in this inventory that show where planning hasn't necessarily existed yet. So we kind of anticipate those to be like hotspots, and again, cross-referenced with communities with fewer resources traditionally.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It's because I'm currently thinking about doing targeted outreach. So I wanted to see if you had any leads for us at the Conservancy.
That's a good question. Maybe we can chat offline about that, Emily. I'd love to pick each other's brains.
Sounds good. Thank you.
We will be here until noon, but we probably, if there's not any questions, we'll just go off camera, but please feel free if anything comes up. We're here, we're not going away, but just so that we can work as well. But thank you so much for joining us. And again, if any other questions arise during the process, please feel free to email us as well.